Hello, good evening. Welcome everybody. So as you know, in botany we are going through some selected chapters according to the weightage, and one of the best way to revise the chapters is through assertions and reasoning questions. So without wasting any time, let's jump into the class. So today's chapter is respiration in plants. Let's see the first question. ATP acts as the energy currency of the cell, which is true. ATP is broken down in the cell whenever and wherever the energy needs to be utilized, which is true as a statement. And indeed, it is explaining why it is used as the energy currency of the cell. So I would go with B as the answer. Both assertion and reason are true, and R is the right explanation of the assertion. Okay, guys? So please go through simple. Let's go for the next question. The food has to be translocated to all non-green parts of the plants. Yes, which is true. In green plants, all the organs, tissues, and the cells that are non-green need food for oxidation for their energy requirements, which is true again as the statement, and it is indeed explaining why assertion is the right statement. So I would go with A as the answer. Let's see the next question. Plants have systems in place that ensure the availability of oxygen. As you know, okay, in plants, for example, if you consider this as our plant, only the superficial or the exterior ones are the alive, and the deep plant tissues are dead anyways. So these tissues will take care of its oxygen requirements directly with the process of diffusion. So plants have systems in place that ensure the availability of oxygen. True. Plants require oxygen for respiration to occur. So what do you think? Both are right as the statements, and indeed it is explaining why they require oxygen. So I would go with B as the answer. So both of them are true, and it is the right explanation as well. Next, it would be better to consider the respiratory pathway as an amphibolic pathway rather than as a catabolic one. Yes, so in respiration, you see both anabolism and catabolism is involved. In such cases, calling respiration as amphibolic pathway is the best one, okay, which is true as a statement. The respiratory pathway is involved, okay, in both anabolism and catabolism. That's the reason why it is called as amphibolic pathway. So both the statements are true, and it is the right explanation as well. Next, when carbohydrates are used as substrate and are completely oxidized, the RQ value will be 1. Yes, which is true as a statement. When carbohydrates are used as substrate, equal amounts of CO2 and O2 are consumed and evolved respectively. See over here, what is he saying? CO2 and O2 are consumed equally, which sounds true, but see here, he's saying CO2 is consumed and oxygen is evolved, which is the other way round. So he has used the term respectively as well. So it is CO2 evolved and oxygen consumed in the RQ. So that is what we calculate as RQ. So I would go with D as the answer. That is, assertion is true, but R is false. Next question. Next question. Glycolysis occurs in the cytoplasm of the cell and is present in all living organisms, whether they are aerobic, anaerobic, whether they are prokaryotic, eukaryotic, you will see glycolysis occurring. Glycolysis is the first step of respiration in which glucose is completely breaks into CO2 and H2O. Okay, in glycolysis, as you know, it is only partial oxidation. Glycolysis is nothing but partial oxidation. So if I say it is completely broken down into CO2 and H2O, which is wrong. So glycolysis means partial oxidation. If we talk about alcoholic fermentation, which is incomplete oxidation, when you say glycolysis, link reaction, TCA, and then ETS, then we call it as complete oxidation. So the answer would be D, where assertion is true, but reason is false. Clear, guys? Hello? Let's go for the next question. Let's go for the next question. Okay, what does it says? For the complete oxidation of glucose to carbon dioxide and water, organisms adopt Krebs cycle, which is also called as aerobic respiration, which is true, isn't it, guys? Isn't it? Let's see the reason. In higher organisms, both the process of aerobic respiration, oxidative decarboxylation and oxidative phosphorylation takes place in mitochondria, which is absolutely true, but it is not explaining why the Krebs cycle is involved in the aerobic respiration process. So I would go B as the answer. I would go B as the answer. Next, let's see the next question. Cytochrome C is a small carbohydrate molecule in ETS. Cytochrome C, it is not a carbohydrate, it is rather a protein. Next, cytochrome C remains attached to the outer surface of the inner mitochondrial membrane, which is true as a statement. So I would go D as the answer, where assertion is false but reason is true. Next, ninth question. Let's see the ninth question. Pure fats are never used as a respiratory substrate in living organisms. Okay, which is true. It's not just pure fats. Okay, you don't see any pure carbohydrates or pure proteins involved, because in our food we take a combination of all these things, so it can't be pure. So which is true. Fats can enter the respiratory pathway at the first step, which is glycolysis. No, they can't enter the first step. So I would go with A as true and R as false, which is D is our answer. Right, guys? Hello? Are you with me? Let's go for the next one. Plants can get along without respiratory organs because each tissue is capable of meeting its O2 requirement. Through how? Through diffusion. You might argue, so how come diffusion is only for short spaces? Now, yes, because most of the internal part of the tree is dead anyways, so each tissue can take care of its own requirement. So which is true? Let's see the reason, as what is reason saying. Roots and stems and leaves respire at rates far faster than animals. No, plants respire plants respire at much lower rate than animals. And that's the reason why, their requirement, of oxygen is much less than the animals. So R would be false. So what would be our answer? D. Assertion is true and reason is false. Next, let's see the 11th question. The breaking of C to C bonds of complex compounds through oxidation within the cells and release large amount of energy is called as respiration, which is true. During respiration, the compounds that are oxidized are called as respiratory substrate, which is true, but it is not explaining. So I'll go with B as the answer. Next, aerobic respiration is the most common in higher organisms, which is true. What is the reason? Saying the enzymes pyruvic decarboxylase and alcoholic dehydrogenase catalyze aerobic respiration. No. Okay, this comes in our anaerobic respiration, so I would go this as a false and the assertion is true, which is the third one. Okay, third one. For 12th one, the answer will be C, where assertion is true and reason is false. Let's go for the next one. The first cells on this planet lived in an atmosphere that lacked oxygen, which is true, because the first initial organisms were anaerobes, which is supported by the first statement. At present, not even a single type of cell can live without oxygen. Even now, there are plenty of anaerobic organisms are there. So the second statement is false. So still there are many anaerobic organisms available on the planet. So what do you go with answer? Answer will be C, where assertion is true and reason will be false. Let's go for the next question. In fermentation, say by yeast, the incomplete oxidation of glucose is achieved under anaerobic conditions, which is true. Pyruvic acid is converted to CO2 and ethanol in lactic acid fermentation. Why on earth that we'll see ethanol in lactic acid fermentation? The name itself indicates lactic acid is released in the lactic acid fermentation. So the reason is false as a statement. So the answer will be assertion is true and reason is false. So the answer would be C. Let's go for the next question. During exercise, anaerobic respiration occurs sometimes in animal skeletal muscles. Okay, which is true as a statement. During the exercise, oxygen is inadequate for cellular respiration, which is true as a statement. And since the oxygen is inadequate, it goes into anaerobic respiration, which is in a kind explaining the assertion statement as well. So I would go as A as our answer. Both assertion and reason are true and R is the correct explanation of the statement assertion. Clear, guys? Hello, are you with me? Next one. Oxidation of one molecule of NADH gives rise to two molecules of ATP. Two molecules of ATP. Hello? You know, when you oxidize a molecule of NADH plus H plus, okay, you get the energy is equivalent to 3 ATP. When you oxidize FADH2, you'll get 2 ATP. So, which is contradictory to this one. So, I would go, okay, A as false. And let's read the R statement. The number of ATP molecules synthesized depends upon the electron donor, which is absolutely right. And this is a direct statement from NCERT. I don't know how many of you remember when you have this ETS diagram, this longer one, next to that, okay, this statement is written. So assertion is false and R is true. I don't know how many of you have like keenly observed. If you see here, my first statement over here is both are right and right explanation. Over here, assertion is false and R is true. That means we in the initial years, the format is A and R are true, right explanation, not explanation. But now even these are being shuffled. So please pay attention. Let's see the next question. Let's see the next question, that is, in ETS from NADH produced in the mitochondrial matrix during citric acid cycle are oxidized by succinate dehydrogenase. No, succinate dehydrogenase is our flavin one. So NADH is NADH dehydrogenase complex. So which is false. Which is false. Succinate dehydrogenase is for our FADH2, not for NADH. So assertion as a statement is false. The complex 1 of ETS transfers electrons to ubiquinone, which is true. So which one will be our answer? A is false, but R is true. D will be our answer. D will be our answer. I hope you guys are with me. Hello? Please go through the questions. Assertions and reasonings are the quick and effective way of revising the entire chapter. And we have prepared, okay, by taking the NCERT lines directly. Next. Oxygen act as the final hydrogen acceptor in ETS. So what does it says? That it says oxygen act as a final hydrogen acceptor in ETS. Everybody, if you can see this ETS diagram where he talks about complex 1, okay, complex 3, complex 2, complex 4 and complex 5, where complex 5 is nothing but our ATP synthase, okay, and this is your F0 and F1 which is involved in ATP synthesis. But if you see over here, after electrons being shuffled from one complex to another complex, over here oxygen is the final acceptor of the electron. Oxygen is the final acceptor of the electron. But the question is talking about hydrogen acceptor. So how can you figure it out? Arey bhai, okay, see here, oxygen not just accept electrons from the complexes, it also accepts the protons from the mitochondrial matrix. So electron and proton, which becomes your hydrogen and becomes water. Please pay attention to the diagrams as well. So if I say oxygen act as a final hydrogen acceptor in ETS, true. Even I can say it is a final acceptor of electron, even then it is true. Clear, guys? Hello? So this statement is true. What does the second statement says? ETS drives the whole process by removing oxygen from the system. Oh no, it goes entirely, okay, opposite to that of ETS. It needs oxygen there. So it is wrong. So I would go with D as our answer. Hello? Is it clear? Is it clear? Let's see the next question. The respiratory quotient depends upon the type of the respiratory substance used during respiration, which is true, which is true. The respiratory quotient depends upon the type of respiratory substance used during respiration, true. In living organism, respiratory substrates are more are often more than one. We don't take only proteins, we don't just take carbohydrates alone, there will be something along with that. So it is always a combination of all the different kinds of biomolecules. So I would say both these statements are true, and it's not actually explaining. So I would go with C as our answer. I'll go with C as our answer, which is our 19th question. I would go with C as our answer. Please, okay, please go through the statements. Next, what is 20th question talking about? In ETS, cytochrome C acts as a mobile carrier for transfer of electrons between complex 3 and complex 4. In ETS, cytochrome C acts as a mobile carrier for transfer of electrons between complex 3 and complex 4. Yes, yes, true. The reduced ubiquinone, okay, that is ubiquinol from complex 2 is oxidized with the transfer of electrons to cytochrome C via BC1 complex, which is true, but it is not explaining why the cytochrome C is a mobile electron carrier. Okay, both the statements are true individually, but it is not explaining why this is acting as a mobile electron carrier. So I would go with C as my answer. C as my answer. I hope you are in agreement with me. Okay, contemplate on these questions. Next, let's see the next question. All the energy required for life processes is obtained by oxidation of some macromolecules that we call it as food. Okay, yes, true. Only green plants and cyanobacteria can prepare their own food by the process of photosynthesis. Okay, cyanobacteria being photosynthetic, so they can also prepare their own food. So I would go both the statements are true, but it is not the right explanation that why, okay, only macromolecules are, okay, can be oxidized to release energy. Next, let's see the next question. The complexes 1, 2 and 3 facilitate the transport of protons across the inner mitochondrial membrane. Complex 1, 2, there you go. There is black sheep over here. Complex 2, do not pump any proton. Do not pump any protons into the PMS, perimitochondrial space, or intermembrane space. So I would go this statement as wrong. Next, the protons accumulate in the intermembrane space of mitochondria during the movement of electrons in the ETS. Yes, see here, this is our PMS or the IMS, perimitochondrial space or intermembrane space. This is your complex 1, this is your complex 3, okay, this is your complex 2, this is our complex 4, this is our complex 5. So while electrons are being shuffled from one, okay, to the other, what is happening? protons are being pumped into the intermembrane space. So yes, statement, the reason statement is true. So if that is wrong and this is right, A is our answer. A is our answer. A is our answer. Clear, guys? Let's go for the next question. Let's go for the next question. Ubiquinone, which is an electron carrier in ETS, is located within the inner membrane of the mitochondria. Ubiquinone, which is an electron carrier in ETS. Ubiquinone is not an electron carrier rather than a hydrogen carrier. So this would be wrong. Ubiquinone is individually a mobile carrier within the membrane rather than residing in a particular complex, which is true. Okay, that means mobile matlab don't think it literally moves. What he meant is it is not an integral part of any of the complexes like 1, 2, 3, 4, so on and so forth. So I would go this as true. Okay, then what will be our answer? The answer will be A. Next, pyruvic acid. Pyruvic acid is the key product of Krebs cycle. Pyruvic acid is a key product of Krebs cycle. What is he talking about? No. Nope. Lactic acid fermentation, alcoholic fermentation, aerobic respiration are the three major ways in which different cells handle pyruvic acid produced in EMP pathway, that is your glycolysis, which is true as a statement. So answer would be A. Answer would be A. Clear? Next, let's see the next question. During oxidation within a cell, all the energy contained in respiratory substrate is not released freely into the cell or in a single step. As you know, multi-step in small packets, okay, the energy is released. So this is true as a statement. Energy produced by respiration is trapped as chemical energy in the form of ATP, which is true, but it is not explaining why the energy is released in small subsequential steps. So I would go as C as our answer. Both statements are true, but it is not the right explanation. So C is our answer. Clear, guys? Clear? Next, fermentation takes place under anaerobic conditions in germinating seeds, which is true. Fermentation takes place under aerobic conditions in many prokaryotes and unicellular. If it is aerobic conditions, why would it undergo fermentation? It goes normal aerobic respiration. So I would go statement 2 as incorrect, statement 1 as correct. So the answer will be D. The answer will be D. The answer will be D. Next, substrate level phosphorylation occurs during the conversion of succinyl CoA to succinic acid in Krebs cycle. Substrate level, that is SLP, occurs during conversion of succinyl CoA to succinic acid. Yes, which is true. Guys, as you know, phosphorylation is of three types. Phosphorylation is of three types. What are they? Photophosphorylation, which is again of two types. What are they? Non-cyclic and cyclic. Next, the second one is our SLP, substrate level phosphorylation. Where can you see them? You can see them in glycolysis. You can see them in TCA cycle. So in TCA cycle, there is no ATP directly formed. So it is the GTP formed, which will be soon converted into ATP. Apart from these two, you have oxidative phosphorylation. Oxidative phosphorylation. Where does this occurs? Okay, this occurs in mitochondria. This occurs in mitochondria. Which particular process, sir? ETS. Which particular process? ETS. Okay, so statement 1 is true. Statement 1 is true. Let's see statement 2. The continued oxidation of acetyl CoA via the TCA cycle requires the continued replenishment of oxaloacetic acid. That's the reason why it is a cycle, right? Cycle matlab, okay, there has to be a continuous supply of all the intermediate. So I would go with A as our answer. Both the statements are true. Both the statements are true. Next. When the electrons pass from one carrier to another carrier via complex 1 to complex 4 in the electron transport chain, they are coupled to ATP synthase. Yes, that's the reason why it occurs. Yes. Okay, which is true as a statement. Let's see the statement 2. Electrons are transferred from NADH to ubiquinone in the last step of electron transport system. No, in the last step, okay, ATP is synthesized. So I would go with B as our answer. Statement 1 is correct and statement 2 is incorrect. Statement 2 is incorrect. Clear, guys? Hello? Let's see the next question. Let's see the next question. Statement 1 is utilized at two steps in glycolysis. Statement 1 says that ATP is utilized at two steps, okay, in glycolysis. What are they? When glucose is converted to glucose 6-phosphate, that is where one ATP is utilized, and another one is when fructose 6-phosphate is converted into fructose 1,6-bisphosphate, another ATP is utilized. So these are the two steps where in glycolysis ATP is utilized. So statement 1 is true. Let's see the second statement. What does it say? In glycolysis, ADP is synthesized during conversion of PEP to pyruvic acid. No, not ADP. Okay, it should be ATP. So I would go this statement as wrong. So the answer would be D. The answer would be D. Clear? The answer would be D. Next. Fermentation accounts for the incomplete oxidation of glucose in aerobic respiration, which is true as a statement, right? I just told you, okay, glucose undergoes three kinds of oxidations. What are they? Glycolysis, okay, which is nothing but, I would rather write like this. Partial oxidation. Example, glycolysis on its own. Remember, glycolysis on its own is partial oxidation. Next comes our incomplete oxidation. Okay, incomplete oxidation. Example, fermentation. fermentation. Then comes our complete oxidation. Complete oxidation, where one has to consider glycolysis followed by link reaction, followed by TCA cycle, followed by ETS. So when glucose undergoes all these four processes in a sequential manner, then you say, okay, it is undergoing complete oxidation. Please pay attention. So what do you say our answer will be for the 30th question? Statement 1 is correct and statement true. Okay, in anaerobic, he says anaerobic. No, if he has written aerobic, then it would have been correct. If he have written aerobic, then it would have been okay, correct. So statement 1 is correct and statement 2 is incorrect. So our answer will be, both are incorrect. Fermentation, no, this is wrong now. That's what I was trying to say. Fermentation accounts incomplete oxidation of glucose in aerobic condition. In aerobic condition. Both are wrong. Both are wrong. Fermentation accounts for the incomplete oxidation of glucose. Okay, yatak tikita. Yatak tikita. Yes, aerobic condition lika. So that's why it is wrong. If this would have been anaerobic, then the statement would have been right. Yes. Yes. So both the statements are incorrect. I would go as D as our answer. I would go D as our answer. I didn't see this. So please pay attention. Next. Glucose is the favored substrate for respiration, which is true. All carbohydrates are usually first converted into glucose before they are used for respiration. Yes, true. In human body, liver is capable of doing that. Whatever form of carbohydrates that we consume, liver has got the capability of converting them into glucose, which is true. So I would go as both the statements as true. I would go as both the statements as true. Next. If fatty acids are to be respired, they would first to be degraded to acetyl CoA and then enter the amphibolic pathway, which is true. Glycerol would enter the amphibolic pathway after being converted to Pagal, which is true. So I would go with both of them as right statements. Okay, correct statements. Next, let's see the next one. Like animals, plants have special systems for breathing or gaseous exchange. Like animals, plants have special systems. No, nope. That's what we've been discussing from the first page of the textbook. Almost all living cells in a plant have their surface exposed to air. Let's read the statement carefully once again. What is he saying? Almost all living cells in plant have their surfaces exposed to air. That's how they're taking care of their own oxygen requirement. So this statement 2 is right and statement 1 is incorrect. Which of the option gives that? Okay, A is our answer. Let's see the next question. During the process of respiration, carbon dioxide, water, energy are used as substrate. On which part? No. This is false. This is incorrect. The combustion reaction of respiration requires oxygen. True. So which one? Statement 1 is incorrect. Statement 2 is correct. So A would be our answer. Next. In glycolysis, In glycolysis, glucose and fructose are phosphorylated to give rise to glucose 6 phosphate by the activity of the enzyme hexokinase, which is true. Okay, which is true. Let's see the next one. During glycolysis, the phosphorylated form of glucose isomerizes to produce fructose 6 phosphate. Yes, which is true. So I would say both the statements are correct. Which of the option gives that? B. Both the statements are correct. Both the statements are correct. Both the statements are correct. Let's see the next question. Let's see the next question. In both lactic acid and alcohol fermentation, not much energy is released. Yes, true. Yes, true. More than 10% of the energy, more than 10% of the energy in glucose is released in the process of lactic acid and alcohol fermentation. If that is true, automatically this will become false. Okay, no, not more than, okay, 10% is released. So I would go with statement 1 is correct, statement 2 is incorrect, which is our statement D. Statement D. Okay, option D is our right answer. Option D is our right answer. Let's see next question. For aerobic respiration, pyruvate is transported from the mitochondria into the cytoplasm. For aerobic respiration, pyruvate is transported from the mitochondria into the cytoplasm. No, na baba, na. Rather pyruvic acid. So as you know, okay, glycolysis occurs in cytoplasm through a series of steps, which we call it as EMP pathway. You will end up making pyruvic acid. So this pyruvic acid will be transported into the mitochondrial matrix, where this pyruvic acid is converted to acetyl CoA, which we call it as link reaction. So pyruvic acid is transported from cytoplasm into mitochondria. It should be the other way round. Okay, it should be the other way round. So it is transported from cytoplasm into mitochondria. So that is false as a statement. That is false as a statement. Let's see the second statement. For aerobic respiration, pyruvate undergoes oxidative decarboxylation by a complex set of reactions catalyzed by pyruvic hydrogenase. For aerobic respiration, pyruvic undergoes oxidative decarboxylation. ये सब ठीक ही था, but it's all right. Adanta correct, but this is wrong. It should be anaerobic, right? So then it is false as well. So I would go, both the statements are incorrect. Okay, both the statements are incorrect. And which one says that? Which one says that? Okay, option C. Option C states both the statements are incorrect. Both the statements are incorrect. Next, the TCA cycle starts with the condensation of acetyl group with oxaloacetic acid OA and water to yield citric acid. What does it say? The TCA cycle starts with the condensation of acetyl CoA with oxaloacetic acid, which requires water. True. True. Condensation of acetyl group with OA is catalyzed by the enzyme citrate synthase and a molecule of coenzyme A is released. True. So both the statements are correct. Both the statements are correct. Unless and until you have the complete idea of the TCA cycle, you can't attempt this question. Next, the metabolic pathway through which the electron pass from one carrier to another is called as electron transport system. The metabolic pathway through which electron passes from one carrier to another is called electron transport system. True. Electron transport system is present on the inner mitochondrial membrane in our on. So I would go with both as true. So 39th question, A option will be right. A option will be right. Okay guys, let's see the next question. Let's see the next question. In fermentation, there is net gain of only 4 ATP molecules for each molecule of glucose degraded to pyruvic acid. No, no, it is wrong. There is no ATP. Next, many more molecules of ATP are generated under anaerobic respiration than in. Then everybody would go for anaerobic, right? Why would we go for aerobic? So this is also incorrect. So D will be the right option. D will be the right option. Let's see the next question. When proteins are used as respiratory substrate, the volume of CO2 evolved is more than the volume of the O2 consumed. That's the reason why their RQ is less than 1. That's the reason why their RQ is less than 1. When proteins are respiratory substrate, the RQ will be 0.9, which is true. So I would say, okay, both the statements are correct. Which option gives that? Okay, when proteins are used, no, this is wrong. The volume of CO2, this is wrong, right? So I would go with this. It's wrong. Statement 1 is incorrect. The statement 2 is correct. Next. In ETS, complex 4 consists of two major components. In ETS, complex 4 consists of two major components, that is F1 and F0. Q by? No. Complex 5, right? In ETS, complex 5 consists of two major components, that is F0 and F1. So this is false. This is false. The F1 headpiece is peripheral membrane protein complex and contains the site for the synthesis of AT from ADP and inorganic phosphate. Yes. Yes. This is true. That is false. A would be our answer. A would be our answer. Next. Let's see the next question. What does it says? Yeast poison themselves to death when the concentration of alcohol reaches about, okay, 31%. Okay, which is wrong. When oxygen is inadequate for cellular respiration, pyruvic acid is reduced to alcohol by decarboxylase. By decarboxylase. No, which is incorrect. C is also. Both are incorrect. In glycolysis, the fructose 1,6 bisphosphate is split into dihydroxyacetone phosphate and 3-phosphoglyceric acid, which sounds true for me. Which sounds true for me. What does it say? Let's read once again. Is it true? In glycolysis, fructose 1,6 bisphosphate is split into fructose 1,6 bisphosphate is split into, okay, Pagal and DAP, not PGA. Pagal and DAP. Pagal and DAP. So statement 1 is wrong. Statement 1 is wrong. The conversion of bisphosphoglyceric acid to 3-phosphoglyceraldehyde is an energy yielding process. No. Okay, so both the statements are incorrect. Both the statements are incorrect. Next, the last question of the day. In stems, the living cells are organized into thin layers inside and beneath the bark, which is true. The cells in the interior of the stem are dead and provide only mechanical support, which is true. That's the reason why, okay, every tissue can take care of its own oxygen requirement. So both the statement 1 and statement 2 are correct. Clear, guys? So here we are, okay, with the assertion and reasoning questions. Okay, read carefully while you are attempting, okay, the biology part. I know all the students want to rush biology as soon as possible and move on to physics and chemistry where it requires more time, okay, for answering those questions. But remember, biology is the one which is scoring for you, so you give, okay, enough time and read them properly. And I hope you are giving your grand test, if not every day, at least alternative day you need to pick up, okay, your grand test. Tomorrow we have our AATS exam. Hope everyone will utilize the opportunity. Thank you and see you later.